First, welcome to all for attending the 13th Bible retreat in 2020. We always look forward to this time with Abuna Daoud and with each other. This year, as you know, the main theme is how do we start, and what we're about to have right now is a panel discussion. It's going to be very fluid, where Abuna, Daoud, George, Basilius, and myself are going to be looking at some questions. Questions relate to the family and questions that relate to individuals, to children, to adolescents. So we're going to have this, you can call it informal discussion and talking with each other around some of these issues that are being faced by the individuals and the families at this time. So first of all, I'd like to welcome and invite Abuna Daoud, who is our beloved guest priest and speaker during this retreat, and also Ahlan bik Abuna, and also to invite and welcome George Basilius. And George is very well known for his work on apologetics and his teachings on apologetics in a few seminaries and schools. So welcome Abuna and welcome George.
Glad to be with you. Glad to be with Abuna Daoud and with you, Abuna Bishoy.
Thank you. Thank you. عيش يا أبونا.
I'm so happy to see you virtually كده. I'm not used with this panel discussion, but let us try, because we received many questions related to the pandemic happening and the problems in the family and problems related to answer the common questions we usually face from the children and the youth. So let me start with Abuna Bishoy. I want to ask you, Abuna, because we know you as a great Orthodox counselor. What do you see when we speak about the problems related to the families facing the pandemic? I mean, related to the anxiety, depression, and how do you see it?
Oh, Abuna, what we're seeing is this outbreak of the coronavirus has made some very drastic changes worldwide, and as Otzek can tell, even the news have completely focused in one direction. In counseling, we speak about something called problem-focused versus and solution-focused. The world has really turned to be focused on one main issue. Even when people are talking over Zoom, the conversations usually begin and take a while where people are discussing the problems, how many cases have been reported, how many deaths have happened, who has recovered. It has made a drastic change in the world, and it has impacted the minds of many people. And it's been a worry. زي ما قلت بتقول يعني حتة التوتر والanxiety. This is something that we see. لو كان قبل كده في توتر وanxiety for the day-to-day stressors, now people are stressed even more because there are more unknowns. Usually anxiety, as Otzek and George would know, anxiety is about uncertainties. I'm not sure what's going to happen tomorrow or later. Now the anxiety is about something that people are afraid of, this virus that is impacting their families. So there's anxiety about self, and there's also anxiety about others, my parents, the elderly, the people that may have come into my household so I can take care of them, my children. And also many families have their children in university. So, and this pandemic, when it all started, a lot of these university students were still at school. Yeah, and they were in their own dorms far away from the family, and they had to come back in the transition of finishing up their exams and so on. So it impacted individuals, whether it be adolescents or children, adults. It impacted the family dynamic as people are worried about tomorrow. Financial issues, would there be enough money to pay this and that with the layoffs? So like Otzek was saying, there is a heightened level of anxiety. in addition to the stressors of life, here is something new, and everybody is worried about it, and everybody is making everybody worry about it. And the media reporting, yes, but with the reporting, it's taken a big chunk of the social media. It has saturated the social media. It's like if you go on Facebook or Instagram or any of these social medias, or just listen to the regular news, it's all about who died and how many cases have formed and how can you stop it. But hold on, here is some fake news. So what I was asked to do is no longer an important thing to consider. So there's a lot of instability, a lot of anxiety, and then also some people, as Otsakiani, you would know even better than me on this, a comorbidity to anxiety is depression, and a comorbidity to depression is like they're sisters of each other. You're anxious, you feel down, you have, you experience the blues, especially with teenagers who are not used to the isolation. They're not used to rules. That their nature is to overcome these rules and rebel against these rules and push the rules. And that also can create anxiety for the parents who are worried about their children. I remember Abuna, one of the adults said to me, I'm having a hard time keeping my teenage boy at home. They just want to go out and they want to, they feel and they believe they're invincible. Nothing bad is going to happen to me. So there is the anxiety, the worry, the fear for elderly, the fear for children, the well-being of the family, economical issues that contribute to that anxiety, and also the feeling of being down. Is this going to be my life? Is this it? There is a new norm that people are not used to, and not everyone does well with change. Some people love change, embrace change. Some people are very happy with what's going on, not because, obviously, of a deadly virus, but because they were sick and tired of their mundane, repetitive lives. And they kind of see an opportunity now, but the majority of people do not do very well with change. And one last thing, Abuna, I would add to this point, is the feeling of hopelessness. It's been a while, and then people anticipate what the government is going to say. And when the government comes out and doesn't say much or says something that is negative, they're going to hold back, they're going to close further. This makes people feel hopeless. Where is the change that they're hoping for? And hope, as one person defined it, is fulfilling a certain desire that I have. I have a desire and I'm able to fulfill it. That means I have hope. A lot of the desires of people, especially in the summertime, where most people go on vacations, where most people can remember, oh, this is what I did. The desire even to go to church now. The desire to go back to church and take communion, and how long this is being prolonged, not being able, at least on our end here in Canada, Abuna, we're not able yet to have families come back to church. That is changing bit by bit now, but that also adds to the feeling of hopelessness. And I can add also later on, Abuna, if I can hear your feedback and George's as well.
Yeah, I want to ask George, when we speak about the positive spiritual impact of this corona on the youth, I know that many of the young people are like against God being the source of this problem or allowing this to happen. But can you see first any positive spiritual impact out of this problem?
Yes. First and foremost, I just want to mention that I am very honored to be with you at ابونا Daoud. I consider you, as you know, my father, my mentor, my teacher, and I am honored to be in your presence. And I'm also honored to be with you, Abuna Bshoy. You're very dear to my heart as well. So it's a great blessing for me to be with you. Yes, in talking to several youth, I tried to paint a picture that they can relate to. So I tell them that imagine yourself playing a game of basketball, and your offense is struggling to score points, your defense is falling apart and you're about to lose the game. So what would a very wise coach do during this time? He would call a timeout, and he brings all the players back to the huddle and what to do, to strategize, to refocus, to readjust the offense, readjust the defense, fix few things here, fix few things there, and then get back on the court. So when you get back on the court, you have a much better chance of winning the game. So pretend that this global mandatory timeout that was given to us, it's an opportunity for us to readjust, refocus, see what we have been doing wrong or incorrectly that we can fix, so that when we get back to the game of life, we have a much better chance to walk away victorious. So I try to draw this analogy that a timeout is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, only if you use it appropriately.
Thank you, جورج. يعني بأكد على كلام جورج، احنا شايفين حاجات كتيرة كويسة. I can see many positives happen because of this pandemic. Many people started to repent, and many people thought of like coming to death. Then so they have to be to face God in our congregation, and also that the desire to catch the community. I imagine that it's not there in any of the church anywhere in the world. Our people, you know, want badly to have a communion. ما فيش كنيسة في العالم نفسها تتناول شعب. في حاجات حلوة كتيرة موجودة في موضوع الرياح. طيب أبونا بشوية, when we speak about family dynamics, what do you advise for now to keep the family, you know, away from anxiety and anger problems and, you know, the friction of the people inside the house all the time because they cannot go out and they are not in their routine life as before. So I need to have your advices.
العفو أبونا, بس I think زي ما George used a very nice analogy. When a coach calls for timeout, actually the players are looking forward to that timeout. Yeah. They needed it, and they are focused. So there is a mindset. Whereas when this happened, people were not in the mindset of a timeout, unfortunately. But they can get into into the mindset. And this is the first thing I would advise, Abuna, is that people need to begin to change their mindset. Change the way they look at the world, to look at suffering. Change the way they analyze suffering and they see suffering. Begin to have a change of mind about what they can work on and what they cannot work on. So one of the things that we say to people who are suffering with anxiety is, ask yourself what's under your control and work on that. Put your time and energy under what's under your control to change, and what is not under your control, like what's going to come up in the news, what's the government going to say, you know, how far this virus is going to spread, is not necessarily something completely under one's control, and people are fussing about it. And people are actually within the family, you have the optimist, and then you have someone who is not so optimist, and you have the pessimist, and then you have the person who is very quiet. And sometimes this creates some sort of an argumentative discussion amongst the family, and it creates conflict. So the first thing that I would think would need to happen is a change of mind. This is what I can do, and this is what we as a family can do, and this is what we cannot do. The other thing I would suggest is to take advantage of the found time. Many people used to complain, I don't have enough time with my children. I don't spend enough time with dad or mom. and now the opportunity has been given. That's a very positive thing if with the right mindsets and with the proper intentions and a good communication amongst the family, they're able to set new rules. Because أبونا قدسك عارف دلوقتي الناس في وش بعض 24 ساعة تقريبا، يعني ما عدا وقت النوم، والزوج والزوجة حتى وقت النوم مع بعض في الأوضة. فيعني unprecedented. يعني people can complain or have complained in the past ما بشوفش مراتي ما بشوفش جوزي دلوقتي قصاد بعض. بس they never had the rules how to deal with this time. هم كانوا متعودين على short time out and then come back. So there has to be renegotiation of life dynamics. Sorry أبونا.
واحد بيقول لي أصعب حاجة في الكورونا هي إن إحنا قاعدين مع بعض طول الوقت. هي دي التجربة يعني.
Yes.
يعني
مش سامع قدسك كويس يا أبونا. مش عارف George, are you hearing أبونا clearly?
No, you're going in and out يا أبونا.
لا أنا بس I'm just saying that يعني someone told me that the most suffering minute is to face my wife and children all the time. So أنا بقول إن اللي قدسك بتقوله إحنا حاسينه كل يوم يعني.
Yes, and Abuna, it's not because the problem is inherent in the fact that they see each other every day. Not at all. It's in the fact. It's in the fact that they never set priorities or set proper dynamic to handle seeing each other at that high level that now is forced on them. They never really worked towards that. زي ما حد ما يكون مش مستعد للجواز مثلا يا أبونا ويدخل في الجواز حاجة زي كده يعني. They need to renegotiate their rules. They need to talk about their family priorities. They need to talk about their schedule, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what's expected. Because a lot of this can remain on the mind's level, where I expected something from my spouse, or my spouse expected something from me, or we expected some things from the children and vice versa, but no one is really explicitly talking and communicating about all this. مش عارف لو قدسك سمعني ولا لا يا ابونا.
أنا سامعك كويس يا ابونا، سامعك ومبسوط باللي قدسك بتقوله. I agree totally إن هم لازم يغيروا العلاقات ويتابعوا الكود بتاع الحياة كلها، والcommunication skills لازم تزيد شوية to avoid problems يعني. طيب عاوز أسأل جورج, when I received many questions from many young people who not happy with the idea of the wrath of God and punishing God, and they cannot relate it to the loving God. When we spoke about the wrath of God and the punishment, many young people are not here, and they thought that this stands against the theme of God is love.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Abuna, that this has been a question that that has challenged many of our youth. But I try to, again, in my discussions with the youth, I try to draw analogies, and I tell them, look at your own father. I don't want to get so much into the theological, doctrinal aspect of it. I do briefly mention that God is infinite in his attributes. So he is infinitely loving, and he is infinitely holy and just. And we should be very thankful that God is infinitely just and infinitely loving. We want him to be infinitely just and infinitely loving. So I say, look at your own personal, biological father. How does he deal with you with these two attributes? He loves you, but if he were to discipline you for one reason or another, that doesn't mean that he stopped loving you this very moment. So both of these attributes of God go hand in hand. And I try to tell them, for example, I give them the analogy of trying to get a vaccine, for example. Small analogy. I say, when I took my little child to be vaccinated and to suffer the pain of a needle in his arm, it hurts. And he was crying and kicking and screaming. But I did this because I love him. So sometimes what the problem is not so much in the attributes of God. The problem is how we have a very skewed, inaccurate definition of God. I tell the youth that we believe that God is our divine ATM machine. ATM machine اللي هي بتروح تاخد منها الفلوس. He's a divine being that all he has to do is to give me pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. That's how our image of who God is, and the image that our culture and our society puts forth. But we have to understand who our dear Lord is and his attributes are. And I tell them also that once we grow in the knowledge of God, we will begin to know that God is infinitely holy and also infinitely loving. They do not contradict one another.
Yeah, thank you, George, because I cannot believe in God as a loving God if he's not just, because يعني لو كان سايب الشر يزيد, that's not fair. So he should at a time stop evil in order to express his love, express his righteousness. So they cannot relate still. But when I speak about the source of evil, how can you answer this question? Because someone may believe that now God is the source of this problem, so he is an evil guy or the source of evil. And even when we speak about the allowance, God allowed this to happen, still he's in charge. So how do you defend God in this case?
Yeah, well, we back to the attributes of God and how infinite these attributes or characteristics are. When I say God is loving, what does it mean? He's all loving, omnibenevolent. He exudes love. This love wouldn't be meaningful if it didn't carry with it a very important attribute, or not an attribute, but a very important virtue. That's the virtue of freedom. If I love someone, I give them the freedom to love me back. So to say God can get rid of all this evil and virus, of course he can. He has the power to do so. But if you want him to be all loving, you also expect him to give you the freedom so that you can exercise that gift that he has given you out of his love. In other words, you can't have it both ways. You can't have an all-loving God that would give you free will and then take it back from you. That doesn't say anything about love. So we have to understand that God is not the source of evil. His love to me gave me freedom. My abuse or misuse of this freedom is what turned into evil. So it's very interesting. I usually say this statement. I say, when I see a beautiful sunset, a beautiful scenery, I praise Mother Earth. But when I see evil, I blame Father God, as if he's always the one to blame when anything goes wrong in this world, not knowing that it's my fault, not his.
Yeah, thank you, George. Abuna, what do you say when someone asks you, how can I stop my mind? I cannot fight the thoughts. I have so many negative thoughts about the future, fears, phobias. I cannot, have any kind of peace in mind or heart. Do we have any way to stop this fight in the mind?
That's a very good question, Abuna, and a lot of people are struggling with thoughts, and we can tell this even when people come talk to us and we give them a spiritual exercise or a discipline, and next month they come back and they're still struggling. So we know that this is a struggle, but it's good that it's a struggle. The fact that it's a struggle, that means that the person is still alive, that the person is still trying to push against the normal current of this world. We know that the normal current of this world is evil. And we know that they call them automatic negative thoughts in the field of psychotherapy. Why? Because our minds can think very quickly about something evil by nature, unless I train it in light of Jesus's grace, of Christ our Lord's grace. If I train myself, and training means it needs time. But every day, if I'm doing something, I'm learning to move forward a step. So some of what we tell, or I tell some of the youth or some of the adults that are suffering with negative thoughts, I actually ask them a question. I say, are you always thinking negatively? Has there been an exception last week where in the midst of all this negative thinking, there was one very rare, almost never happens again, but only one time where you thought differently? And usually people have that experience in their own lives, Abuna. They have these exceptions. And it's God's grace. يعني من نعمة ربنا إنه الexceptions دي موجود. This acts as a good platform to show the person and help the person realize, no, this is possible. There was a time where I actually stopped the negative thinking. I actually did not go into my pessimistic mode. And then we explore it. So what happened? How come you didn't think negatively? And I expand it. And I get them to realize within their own resilience, within their own God-given resilience, how they're able to overcome and maybe pay attention to that grace that exists within them where there was an exception. This is one thing. Another thing, Abuna, that we can do is I explain it in terms of a game. Anxiety is actually a game. It's a mental game. And the game has a certain sets of rules. بس عارف قدسك الجيم اللي يبقى الرول بتاعته لازم تخسر كل مرة. يعني there is no chance for you to win. The game goes like this. Anxiety game goes like this. Rule number one, you are not certain about what will happen tomorrow. Rule number two, you have to be certain about what's going to happen tomorrow. Rule number three, it is not good for you not to be certain. And that's it. Those three rules mean you're going to lose every time. You're not certain, that's true. It is not good to be certain, that's not good. And you cannot be certain about tomorrow. You can't. So the game, the mental game, the mind, the corruption of the mind, Abuna, the corruption of the mind makes these games, makes these sets of rules that there is no way anyone can win if they think along those lines. So I begin to tell the adolescent or tell the person, say, listen, you are not certain about tomorrow, but that's okay. Has there been a time in your life where you did not know what's going to happen and you were still okay? And they usually can draw an example and say, yes, I mean, I wasn't sure if I was going to pass, my driving test, and I was okay. Say, what? How come you were okay? So you know what, if I don't pass this time, I'll pass next time. So you begin to rewire the mind. I am not certain. And instead of saying it's not okay, say, no, I am not certain, but it's okay not to be certain. And in fact, as Christians, we have an advantage, Abuna, because we can say, I am not certain, but it's okay that I'm not certain because God is certain. and I'm in the hands of God, that I know. And the rest that I don't know, He knows. And then we take them one step further, Abuna. This is almost like rewiring their mind. It takes training. Say, I'm not certain. It's okay not to be certain. It's actually good not to be certain. Because then I don't have to worry. I don't have to, there are times where it's better not to know. And people actually, this is one of the ways that we've worked with adolescents, Abuna, and with individuals, and it falls under a therapy called CBT, it's like aware of it, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is helping rewire the way we think and not playing the game. Because in the game, I lose every time. And most people say, no, I don't want to lose anymore, so I'm going to change the rule.
Thank you, Abuna. I think what you say is related to the definition of faith, because when you have faith, you trust things you cannot see. So that's the uncertainty. So when we grow in faith by prayer, by Bible reading, and by being into the service, and having God in mind most of the time, this helps a lot. George, when we speak about suffering, we always have this common question of suffering. How can you convince people that suffering and pains are something good, not always bad? Because most people can see Corona now is like a disaster and nothing good in this. But we used to say that when it comes to pains and suffering, that's like this.
Yes, to very briefly, I loved what Abuna Bishoy mentioned earlier and your comments, Abuna Daoud. I always say that I may not know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds tomorrow. And that gives me, that's, back to, my faith as a Christian in the midst of all the uncertainties. But back to the question of suffering, and again, here's another analogy. A youth one time asked me the same question, Abuna, you asked. Why do we have to go through all this suffering and so on and so forth? I told them, hey, listen, when is the last time you did laundry? Did you put your clothes in the laundry? If you were to go and have a camera built into this laundry machine, what do you think would happen to all the clothes, the articles of clothing that you have in there? They were tossed back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But then when you take them out of the laundry machine, they're pure clean. So imagine that the suffering is the big laundry machine that God allows in this world. We ought to be cleansed. If you don't want to wash your clothes, you're not going to wear them. You're not going to want to see them, but you wash them so that you can get them clean. We are washed through this suffering to get us clean. Of course, there are, as you know, Abuna, there are hundreds of examples in the scriptures, but I try to make them think of something that is tangible, something that can relate to. And lastly, I tell them that God always brings good out of what seems to be evil, and I always go back to the concept of Good Friday. I say the worst evil that was ever committed was the crucifixion of the Lord. Now it's very interesting how Christians call the day on which the worst crime was committed, they call it Good Friday. They should have called it the worst Friday, but they call it Good Friday because there's always good that comes out of these sufferings.
Thank you, George. Abuna, what do you say to someone who lost his father or mother all of a sudden in 1 or 2 weeks because of this pandemic, and he felt bad, and he passed through the denial stage for some time. Then his heart is full of wrath and he cannot accept what happened in few days. and it was like a bad dream. How can you help such a one?
Abuna, this is a tragedy for the person. It is hard from a human perspective. It's a tragedy, and we're all humans. The reality is this is very difficult, and I initially do not need to move that person from where they're at this point. I need to join them where they're at. What makes it difficult for that person is they're not able to make meaning of what happened. We are, as it said, we are meaning-making people, species. We make sense of everything. And when we are stuck not being able to understand here meaning to have a meaning, to draw a certain reasonable meaning out of what happened, we get stuck. And a person begins to grieve. And they go through denial, they go through sadness and depression, they go through anger, they then cycle back and forth in all of these until they come to a point where they begin to have a meaning, that begins to satisfy them, where they begin to settle and then accept the loss. So the most important thing is to be with that person and not to judge that person. And sometimes even, some people would say to this person, but your father is in a better place. Even though we know that's true, but that statement at that time, Abuna, may not be the most helpful. It's actually could be very hurtful to the person because they're not at that point yet. So the best thing to do is to really be with the person where they're at, to make them feel they've lost someone, but there are other people around this person now. Then this person who died did not, the memory of that person did not die. And one of the nice things that we have in the West is that people begin to honor those who have departed by remembering what they stood for. Or they donate, let's say, a room in the hospital under their name. They honor them. They honor who that person lived. They live out some of the nice values and qualities and virtues that person lived out. Mm-hmm. But it's the process of walking alongside this grieving person, not judging them, not expecting them to snap out of their grief. Yes, we can give them words of comfort, and some of the best words of comfort are not words, but they're actions. I remember we went with one of the fathers, the bishops, to give our condolences to a person who lost a very significant other, a significant person like a husband or wife. And what that bishop did that touched my heart is he didn't talk, but he started to cry along with the person. And it reminded me of what Christ did with Lazarus. Jesus cried, Jesus wept. And not necessarily words, but being present and joining, like the Bible tells us, rejoice or be joyful with those who are joyful and weep with those who are weeping. There's a lot of strength in just joining alongside those persons and being close to them. Again, we have the tendency to be crisis managers. We manage crisis. We jump when the fire is there, and then after a while we begin to disappear. And I am guilty of this. And we begin to just disappear. But we need to be so present and continue to be present in the life of that person who lost someone they love. And that relationship is therapeutic by its own.
Yeah. Thank you, Abuna. Abuna, again, when we speak about the Christian counseling, someone may see psychology and counseling and coaching like replacing spiritual advices and القانون الروحي, and how can make this work together? Because some people are not happy with the idea of psychology, coming more and more into the church.
Yes, that's something, Abuna, that exists obviously because people don't know how to integrate the two, and not people. I mean, specific people. The world in general has asked that question, and books have been written about how do we marry Athens with Jerusalem. You know, like how do we? What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? A very old say between philosophy and theology, and the same thing happens with psychology. So it's
Yes.
good to educate and help people realize that anything that is good and true comes from the Lord, no matter which discipline it is in. If it's something is true in philosophy, it is there put by God. If something is true in psychology, it is there put by God. And a Christian counselor is someone who holds Christian values as they counsel. They may not be people who necessarily use the biblical texts. They may, but they don't have to. But they hold a Christian worldview. They value life. They believe in a creator. They believe that some of the tools in psychology that focuses very much on self and ego and me may not be the best tools on the long run for the person. And they may lead to more chronic problems later on. So a Christian counselor makes this balance and this connection. Logical tools in order within a framework of proper theology and proper worldview, Christian worldview. What we can tell people, that's one thing to help them understand. Also, there have been stigmas. So there have been some people's experience where they go to a counselor and they get an advice that they've taken, and it turned out very bad for their marriage, or it turned very bad for them individually. We tell them that a counselor does not replace your spiritual father. Everyone has something to do. In fact, the father, the priest, may come in meeting with a certain person and say, this particular problem you're talking to me about actually requires you to see a counselor. This is not my area, but part of what I need, I can tell you spiritually, is this. But there is something much deeper, much deeper, that needs to be opened up and worked through with the proper tools of counseling. So I see them augmenting one another, because as humans, Abuna, I think of it, how about the physical ailments? When a person comes and says, Abuna, I've been having these problems with my back, Abuna can give some spiritual directions, but will most likely tell this person, go check it out with your doctor. So we are physical, psychological, spiritual beings. And in order for us to care about somebody holistically, we need to pay attention to all three areas that God created us in. And so I see it as augmenting. I see an integration that needs to happen. I see that there are stigmas that need to be overcome. And I also see that the role of Abuna, or the father of confession, is indispensable. No one can give. In fact, in counseling, when spiritual matters gets open, one of the things that a counselor would ask and say, are you getting spiritual guidance? Because that's the area of expertise of a spiritual person, the father of confession or the spiritual guide.
Thank you, Abuna. George, someone may ask, how can the loving God put someone into fire forever, for millions of years, even if this guy had done many bad things in his limited life, because he was wicked, but for like 70 or 80 years. So the punishment is like endless fire. So that's not fair. How would you answer this common question now?
Yes, agreed. It is a common question, and it discusses it challenges the fairness and the justice of God. But one needs to understand that the result, end result, whether eternity in this case, or the punishment of the crime, doesn't necessarily depend on the duration of the crime. That's one thing. The other thing is that the nature of the crime. So the duration and the nature. If you look at the legal system, for example, if I were to murder someone, it takes me seconds and minutes to commit this crime. I should go to the judge and say, listen, it only took me 2 minutes to commit this crime. You can only put me in jail for 2 minutes. So the punishment of the crime depends on not the duration, but the magnitude. مقدار العمل, magnitude of the crime, not the duration of the crime. That's one thing. The second is the nature of the crime. What is the nature of the crime? It's complete rejection of God. So when you reject God and you don't want to be with God, God is not going to leave you alone. He's going to want to, knock on your door, try to bring you back to him. But if you continue persistently rejecting him, then you have chosen for yourself to live eternally without him. And your sin, thirdly, your sin, it may be, yes, limited as far as days, months, years, but that sin is directed to a God who is unlimited. David says in the Psalms, to you only I have sinned. From that perspective, our sins directed to the infinite, unlimited God take on the nature of unlimited, infinite sins. That's why it required an unlimited, infinite being who can get rid of the sins for us, i.e. the Lord Jesus Christ. So there are 3 reasons how we can approach this question.
Thank you, George. When we speak about this staying in houses, how can you please give us like a schedule of the day? How can we make use of this long day staying all together in the same house and we do not have any chance to go here and there? Give us some advices what to do in order to make use of the time.
So, Abuna, this it relates to what we talked about earlier. First, to take advantage of found time that I was seeking to have before. But it does need, as Utsak just mentioned, محتاجة ترتيب, محتاجة some sort of a discussion and communication amongst the family members to set some sort of a schedule. بس قبل السكيدجول كمان أبونا محتاجة ترتيب physical. يعني مش معقول المكان اللي هاكل فيه هو اللي هذاكر فيه هو اللي هريح فيه هو اللي هقرا فيه الانجيل هو that needs to change. المكان لازم اخصص مكان لاولادي لان قدسك عارف انه now they are studying online, فلازم يبقى لكل واحد مكان مريح يقدر ان هو sit there and study, and that would be their work place or the study place. There needs to be a different place where everyone sits and eats. Some people might say, يعني دي حاجة obvious, we have the dining room. We all know that many people don't eat in the dining room. They eat in front of the TV or they eat up in the rooms. And these are not good habits at all, especially in a time like this. So the parents have a very important role to be more organized and to negotiate with their children. This is going to be the place where you will eat. This will be the place in your room where you will sleep. This is where we will read the Bible together. This is where we can eat, and so on and so forth. So first setting up the geography, as we would say, the geography within the home. Another thing to do, Abuna, is to look at not allowing our children to sleep in. And unfortunately, this has been the case for many families, especially those who have boys. Because many of the boys, Abuna, have been staying up overnight playing video games till 4 or 5 in the morning. And then they would sleep from 5-ish in the morning and not wake up before 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. And this creates a very bad lifestyle. It actually works counterproductively against their health and their well-being, their psychological well-being, and so on. In addition to other problems and sins that can begin to happen due to some of the mood swings that they will experience because of this damage to the circadian clock that they have. So it's good to wake up at a certain time, begin the day with prayer. And now, Abuna, as Utsek said, many have benefited from forming a home, an altar at home, a prayer place and a prayer time. Those who used to complain that they had to rush in the morning now have more time to set things straight in their spiritual life. So beginning the day with prayer. And it could be now beginning the day with family prayer. It could be. Or it could be midday prayer with the family. They can start to do their work, have breakfast, do their work, and then the family gets together around dinner time, which is the most important time, as Utsek knows, here in Canada, in the US, that's the most important meal time. And then there has to be intentionality about quality time. Before, people used to have time, but not quality time necessary. Now they have the potential of and the time to have quality with each other. So going out for walks. That's now with the better weather that we have, people can actually do that. Sitting, together and talking, reflecting. Reading the scriptures together and having each one talk about what they have read and so on. Discovering a new hobby as a family. There could be a set time for that. Also, Abuna, it's important that they strengthen their bonds by doing something actively. People, sometimes we get into the mindset that good things are going to happen without us doing anything. We expect our family ties to be better just because we're together. No, we're together. That could be good, could be bad, as Utsek said earlier. But we have to be intentional. We have to put the proper ingredients in, the better communication, giving space to one another. There has to be a time in my day where I am by myself, and other members in my home, as long as it's safe for them to do so, they have time to themselves, so that the boundaries are not meshed and they're able to have time together, time apart, time as a family, time to pray, time to study, time to work, places where they can do this that are different, and to also consider building together some hobbies or maybe serving. I've seen, Abuna, some families that they began to prepare gift bags. And they go and they take consent from the people. Can I pass by and give you a gift bag? I'll leave it at the door and you can sanitize it when you take it. And they have entered into service, whereas before they weren't serving. So that again takes some of their time schedule in the day to prepare this. But I guess the key point is to be intentional about the schedule and to be intentional about family ties and to be intentional about quality time together.
Thank you, Abuna. George, speaking about the sign of the beast, people started to relate what's happening in the world now with the end of the world. So many people started to focus on the book of Revelation, and they related the sign of the beast to something, in the news. What's your idea about it?
This is the new rumor now that we are going all to get vaccinated with the mark, 666 and all of that. I say that the mark of the beast, if we were to study Revelation appropriately and understand that this book is intended to convey symbolism, not literal meaning, the sign of the beast is not a chip that you will get under your skin. The sign of the beast is not something that you would accidentally take either. Why is that? The mark of the beast, according to Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18, is a mark that is associated with the worship of the beast. It is not a physical mark that you will have. It's the worship of the beast. It's the mark of your will, your actions, your mind, your everything. So the mark of the beast is your loyalty to the beast. But we need to look at another mark, that if you read Revelation chapter 14, verse 1, there's another mark. That's the mark of the Lamb. So we as Christians ought not to be worried about the mark of the beast. We have been privileged and granted a mark of the Lamb that we hold dear to our hearts. Lastly, the revelation, it's the revelation of whom? If you read the very first verse, the revelation of Jesus Christ. Many times we fall victims to the propaganda of Hollywood, the movies, the novels, the stories that like to sensationalize our imaginations and look at the dragon, the beast, the Armageddon, the second coming. We ought not to fear these things and fall victims to these things. We have our Lord Jesus Christ. He's the star of the show. Satan, the beast, they're not the stars of the revelation of the end times. The Lord Jesus Christ is, and we belong to him, and we ought not to fear anything like that.
Thank you, George, for this answer, and thank you, Abuna, for your precious answers. And we have to have some. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Abuna.
Thank you, Abuna, for your presence.
Have a good day.